Okay, welcome to the AI and Media Town Hall. We have a packed agenda, so I'm going to go over quickly the format and some housekeeping items. So this is our first event like this, so please bear with us. There may be a few hiccups. Everyone but our panelists should be on mute, and when you enter, you'll be on mute, but you can turn your cameras on. We'd love to see your face, but we'll have to stay muted for the time being. At the very end, we'll see if we have a little time to hear questions from you directly. But for now, you'll have to put your questions in the chat box, and we'll go through them and answer as many as possible. And after we've spoken to all of our panelists. So if you could, some of you at least, drop a few words in the chat box right now, just so we can make sure that we see you. And we're going to start with, oh, by the way, this is being recorded. And we'll have access to it. We will post it on social media, on our site, and so forth. So we will have access to this later. So without further ado, let's start with some introductions. Of course, you may know me. I'm Leland Crane, New York-based DP. I've been in this industry for 30 years. Last year was a tough one for all of us because of the strike, but it allowed me to spend a little more time learning about this new technology, AI. I asked myself, how can AI help me to work smarter, eliminate busy work so I can focus on the creative stuff? So I ended up co-founding Shotlist AI, which is a productivity app that allows filmmakers to upload a script, create a draft of a shot list in minutes using a large language model, and then modify it and make it their own. It's a creative assistant, not something that replaces creativity. So while I was missing all my friends in TV and film last year, I did have the opportunity to work with developers and data scientists who have a deep understanding of AI and to learn new things outside of my wheelhouse. I talked to many of our beta testers and I learned how they view AI, both as a threat and an opportunity. There are more questions out there than answers right now. So without any more delay, I want to introduce our esteemed panel of incredibly accomplished experts who have agreed to share their insights with our filmmaking community. First of all, Stephen Beer is a legal counsel specializing in film, television, and music industries. He's a trusted advisor to content creators, industry leaders, and acclaimed artists. Welcome, Stephen. If you could just, we'll unmute you so you can say hello. Vicki, you have to unmute him.
Okay.
You click on him and ask to unmute. Okay. Hi, Stephen.
Hey, good afternoon, everybody, at least afternoon on the East Coast. And if you're out West, good morning. It's really great to be here. This is such an exciting topic for curious minds and a nice opportunity to share information and to learn from my esteemed colleagues on the panel.
Thank you, Stephen. Okay, Lauren Weber is a reporter at the Wall Street Journal. She writes about employment and workplace issues with a special interest in job security, labor, and the intersection between economic trends and on-the-ground practices of employers. So hello, Lauren.
Hi, thank you for having me. Also very interested to hear from my co-panelists and hear questions from the audience. I am both a media worker and someone who writes about workers. So I think about this with both of those hats on.
Super. All right. Ryan Emanuel is an LA-based data scientist and DP. His dual expertise in cinematography and machine learning brings a unique perspective to image processing. And he recently launched Filmatic AI, a startup that uses machine learning for color correction. Ryan is also a member of the ASC's Committee for AI. Hello, Ryan.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
All right. Excellent. So let's get right into a question that we're going to go around and ask each panelist, just a brief one to kickstart us, get us going. So what I'd like to ask first for Stephen, briefly and broadly, in your opinion, what does the future of work in media particularly look like over the next 3 to 5 years?
Hopefully not too disruptive for lawyers, but in all seriousness, this is a watershed moment. And I think in 3 to 5 years, we are going to see seismic change, a tsunami wave that will have an impact on some jobs, on many jobs. Some will be lost, but others will be gained. It's a mixed bag, and reason. Although change is difficult, I think there's plenty of reason to be optimistic. There will be job losses in the mechanical skills area that machines are learning to do and doing well. You know, animation, post-production, even talent, for, you know, the workforce will look different, and technology will play a much bigger role in productions, and on both the studio level, but also the very low budget level. In short, I think AI could contribute to a resurgence of a sustainable ecosystem for all films, but especially for low budget films in the independent sector, where the cost of production, whether it's for labor or for you know, technical services, is really outsized in conjunction with the marketplace, where the distribution models are really under stress.
Excellent. Yeah, I've been hearing from reports back from film festivals, people are actually more excited about indie film in this period right now, because the studios are making less content or have decided to draw back. So Lauren, same question for you, but maybe more focused on journalism and writing, and how you see that changing, and also the people that you write about.
Yeah, I think it's going to touch all of our lives, generative AI in particular. I think we're all going to be using it. I've started keeping, you know, I have like the free subscription to ChatGPT. It's 3.5, I think. I've started just keeping a window open with that, and I will ask it questions during my day, sometimes work related, sometimes personal, recommendations, things like that. And it's really fascinating to see where it gets things wrong, where it gets things correct. But my understanding is that each successive version is just like exponentially better. So I think a lot of the errors that we see today will be, you know, over time kind of fixed, and it will become more and more powerful. So I think we will all be incorporating it into our days, and into our work. I think in terms of who it affects, as with any kind of technology, there are winners and losers. And you know, we've always been told with technology that it helps people who do higher order creative work. I think that's where things seem quite different with this. It can do a lot of high order and creative work. So I don't know if that means, for me personally, I think, you know, it will probably be writing my first drafts. I will still be editing them and fact checking them. But it will never be able to do the hardest part of my job, which is figuring out what to write about. I don't think it can do that, because it's very real time, and it comes from talking to people. And it's the hardest thing I do, is sort of sifting through a lot of signal, you know, a lot of noise to find the signal. I hope I'm correct that it won't be able to do that eventually, but I think it's going to have major impacts for all of us.
Excellent. Thank you.
Oh,
Okay, sorry about that. You know, as we said, first time caller, long time listener. Okay, same question for Ryan, but maybe you are a computer scientist, so you've been already, I imagine, integrating AI here. And what you deal with is computers, right? Cameras are now computers, and post-production is computers. So how do you see that playing out in the next you know, few years? You need to unmute him. 1 second, we're gonna unmute him. Okay, there you go, Ryan.
Yeah, so I mean, I guess I can speak a little bit more to the technology side of things. I mean, yeah, it's very difficult to say like exactly where we're going to be in the next 3 to 5. I mean, I can give you one side of it, that like if you're looking at like let's just say a graph with respect to time, how many AI papers from PhDs are coming out with basically like a new model or a new version of pre-existing tech, that curve is exponentially going up. Like, so there's a lot more people in the space who are trying to basically optimize some of these issues. But like, while that is going on, and technology, I'm sure everyone has seen that has been updating at like a rapid pace, right? Some at the same time, some of these larger issues and pain points of the underlying structure of the models, there is no solution for it. Like at this juncture, like, you know, so some of the things that have to do with like artifacts and you know, hallucinations, or just like ChatGPT saying something that is not true, right? Like those sort of issues based on the structure of the models is like very, very difficult to overcome. So like as all I can say for looking into the future, these are all predictive models, right? They're all predictive. So they're either trying to predict a quantitative metric, like a number or something, or some sort of categorical variable, you know, like just like whether something will be profitable or not, something like that, right? So in that sort of scope, when you're looking at where AI is going to land as far as, you know, implementation into the job force within the next 3 to 5, it's all about the level of false positives and false negatives. So when the model thought that it was right and it was actually wrong, and vice versa, when it was wrong and it thought it was right, like what is the weight and consequence of that within the job field, right? And so if there is weight, like you know, if this was in the pandemic and you know you had an AI that was going to predict whether or not somebody had COVID, false negative or
The stakes would be very high, right?
yes, exactly. So
yeah.
that's really like the scope that I think is important to look at. But I think, you know, at least my best estimate is that the next 3 to 5 is going to be about augmentation, about taking busy work out of the process. But like Lauren said, I don't think that it's practical for it to actually make like the real cognitive decisions, but instead, most likely in the next 3 to 5 is going to be replacing the busy, repetitive tasks that we might have to do within our respective jobs.
So we'll still be in charge at least for 3 to 5 years, but we're not ceding control of decision making yet. Thank you, Ryan. That's fantastic. So we're going to go back to Stephen. There were a lot of questions around legality of different issues that came. Most of these questions now came from our participant. I mean, our participants who submitted them in advance. So first off, what legal protections currently exist in the US regarding job preservation and AI? So should we expect government regulations in the future, or is this more the province of collective bargaining of labor unions? Is it not really government's place?
So if we're just focusing on workforce, and that is very much in the sphere of labor unions, and of course we had a textbook example in slow motion during 2023 with the WGA, DGA, and SAG all negotiating their renegotiating their deals with the producers. The two of those unions, of course, went on strike, and SAG had always had AI on its priority list of negotiating points, but due to the fear factor, it really surfaced as the priority issue and the one that really dragged out. And it's a work in progress, but all three unions have done a good job at addressing in an initial instance of addressing the concerns and putting in some sort of guardrails and protection. But it is the government has not stepped in. We're waiting on some of the Biden task force rules to come out, as well as the Copyright Office, which has been doing a deep dive and research and hearings into copyright and AI. And I think we'll see how that really impacts things going forward. And of course, there are some some litigations that are very prominent and pending that may have some impact more on copyright than on the labor force. But the long the answer to that is, or the short answer to the long question and discussion is that it's really up to the labor unions and the workforce, and there are many creatives who are outside those unions, so they will have to fend for themselves, and their attorneys will be. We're already getting into that and drafting elements, but that's job preservation. That's a very difficult issue. Preserving opportunities in the future. That's something that we can work on, but it's largely with the unions.
And we'll probably have to get back to a little more about the unions later, but I know that a lot of people might be interested in the IA negotiations that are entering very soon. I know that minimum staffing is one way that IA has managed to protect itself, but we'll get to that later if we have time. Can you tell us a little bit about these EU regulations that are adopted? What are they addressing? And do they have impact in the US, or are they a model for us to look at to adopt similar regulations here?
The answer is yes to both. They do impact companies in the US that are doing business in the EU. So if you're a film production company and you're creating content that will be distributed through the EU, the IA Act will have an impact on that. Similarly, if you are an EU company that is using an LLM, large language model that is, or some sort of database in the that's based in the US, that also will have an impact on that. And without getting into all the details, the EU, the IA Act that the EU imposed is very much focused on transparency and risk. They are very emphatic about that AI generated images must be clearly marked. They're very, very sensitive about potential of disinformation and deep fakes. They've set up a tier system that looks at various risk levels. The good news for creatives is that the AI tools for the entertainment and media business, such as creating video games and film, those receive the least onerous regulations, but there still are transparency obligations, even where there's minimal risk as tiered under the EU. So full disclosure is something that is an obligation that companies doing business in the EU will have to align with.
Right, and I think most of the film production companies also have these concerns. We have one more question for you, Stephen, but we're running short on time, so I'll just ask you very quickly. So we had a recent interview with the CTO of OpenAI that was all over the internet, saying that Sora, the video generation tool that they've created, was trained only on publicly available videos, but that CTO did not want to provide any specifics. Now, we all, as creators, have work that was either posted by us or by production companies, owners of the material. Is there anything we can do as creators to protect our intellectual property and prevent it from being used to train models? Or is that, that may take our jobs down the road, or is that ship sailed? Are we already?
No, that issue is actually under scrutiny in various high profile litigations. And although these contests are moving slowly, they really go to the heart of the control of what if you're an owner, if you copyright owner of your material, of how that material can be used through AI. And it's something that is really make or break, and it's under evaluation right now and being contested in those high profile litigations.
Okay, awesome. Interesting stuff. And I'm sure there's a lot of other questions they'll have for you at another time. Okay, Lauren, let's move on to the reporter and journalist. So with previous waves of technology, we've always been told that creativity was pretty much the realm of humans. But what does research now tell us about AI's capabilities to do creative work?
It seems based on some of the early studies that I've seen that it can do very creative work. This I think is the game changer part of this compared with other kinds of automation or technologies. It's that higher order stuff. We've always been told that, this is what humans bring and can do best. So there's a really important study that came out, I think, a few months ago, that I think about all the time. It was done by professors at MIT and also Boston Consulting Group, a big consulting firm. So they took two groups of consultants and split them up into two groups. One had access to ChatGPT, I think 4.0, and one group did not. The group that had access got a little bit of training on how to use the technology. Then both groups were given two problems. One was an analytical question. Here's a case study. It's about an apparel company. You have to decide, it's a women's apparel company. Should they go into children's clothing or men's clothing? The second task was a creative task. You had to design a sneaker. And what they found was that both teams did about the same, I think, on the analytical question, which should we invest in, children's clothes or men's clothes? Both got it wrong, both groups got it wrong about the same amount. Maybe the group with ChatGPT actually did a little bit worse. But on the creative task, the group that had access to ChatGPT actually did much better. I think this was based on, senior consultants were probably assessing the results. That to me is like a really shocking result. The group that had access to ChatGPT had access to this large language model that had sneaker designs or shoe designs or just designs, period. That was much more vast than any, team of consultants had in their own brains. So that access to that huge amount of information allowed the large language model to create, to brainstorm in more creative ways and come up with more creative solutions. So, how I think that result can probably be applied in a lot of different ways. And I think you see a lot of people already using these technologies for that kind of brainstorming purpose. And ideas. And I think for anybody in a creative industry, that's concerning.
Yeah.
And I should add also, and I should have pointed this out in my earlier comments, where I think the creative industries are so different than most parts of our workforce is the high number of freelancers and contractors and self-employed people. I have an employer who's looking out for my interests on copyright issues and things like that. People who are in a union have that same thing. I'm also in a union, so I kind of get some of that from two different parties. But I think for people who either are 1099s, freelancers, contractors, contingent workers, gig workers, and who are not in a union, so there's no one speaking for you and advocating for you on some of these systemic questions, I think that becomes much more complicated.
Interesting. And I think traditionally in the media industry, there has been some spillover from unions. And generally, when unions make contracts, people in the non-union world will try their best to get as close to those contracts as possible to keep the people happy. But in the case of this, there may be a big discrepancy between what happens in the non-union world and the union world. So there's been a lot of speculation about this impact, and we've already talked about it a bit. So who currently are you seeing experimenting most with AI in the workplace?
So I think at the moment, it's very hard to separate some of the hype from the reality. And when I talk to companies in many different industries, not just creative or media, obviously. And there's a lot of reluctance to use generative AI in areas that are high risk. So for instance, I was talking to a hospital executive. They're not using generative AI for diagnosis or treatment plans, but they're using it for note-taking and documentation so that doctors can have an AI program listening in on their appointments with patients, and it's automatically generating the documentation. Again, it's that kind of the grunt work, the tedium that it's helping to replace. So I think especially when you have, and the corollary here might be big studios, they don't want to get in trouble on copyright issues or other things. I'm sure they have large legal teams. Stephen's job depends on this. So I think there will be a reluctance to use this in anything where there's kind of a high legal risk, at least for a while. But, also I should say, new data came out from the Census Bureau on Thursday, looking at, they do sort of a regular survey of businesses on business trends, and they've started asking companies about AI. They found that of the companies that they surveyed, 2.8% had increased their headcount, their employees, because of generative AI and their investments in it. 2.6% had decreased their headcount because of generative AI. So it's practically a wash, and in overalls, an increase in employment. But I think that those numbers will change rapidly. But I think it's, for me, that's an interesting reality check. It's not currently leading to like large scale loss of jobs. That said, again, this goes back to creative work being so heavily dependent on contingent workers, contractors, and freelancers, also a lot of offshoring. I think we don't know what the impact has been because the Census Bureau doesn't ask companies about their use of contractors. They're only asking them about those W-2 employees. So I think their numbers actually might understate the job impact so far a little bit.
It's interesting that we keep coming back to this idea of the stakes involved with the decision making of the AI, right? The doctors know that an ultrasound, for example, could potentially be read much better with tons of information and data by a machine. However, we need that human to make the decision. So we're not really ready to cede those control of those stakes. A last question about skill erosion, entry-level jobs in the career path. Do you see that as being a problem moving forward? Are we going to wind up, my kids, they are going to be not great spellers because, we actually, our robot vacuum just launched itself in the room here without our decision. Our kids will not be as good spellers as we are because they always have access to spell check, and maybe going forward the next level of school kids won't be as good at grammar because they're always going to have some predictive text. Are we going to see that in other fields?
Yeah, that is something I worry about a lot, is this question of skill erosion. You think about GPS. We now all have a map, on our phone that's telling us where to go at all times. I used to be really good at reading maps and figuring things out. I couldn't find my way around the borough of Brooklyn where I live because I'm so dependent on GPS. So it's that kind of thing, but writ large, like you said, on writing. I mean, I really worry, are we going to lose the skill of writing? I expect my kids are not going to be writing, term papers or whatever in a few years, and their teachers will have learned to adapt to that so that the teacher's role will be somewhat different. I was talking to a marketing professor recently who was telling me about a program that writes a novel for you. You give it a setup, a man stands, it's a romance novel, and a man stands on a beach looking out at the water, and you feed it like that, and it can write the first chapter of your novel. And then you give it a few more prompts, it writes the next chapter. So, do we lose basic skills like writing? I mean, I already know, I was talking to a venture capitalist the other day who uses an AI program to write his emails. He probably looks over most of them, but maybe not. So yeah, that kind of thing. There's a lot of really interesting research on this question of skill erosion. It's real. So do we forget how to do basic things? And then, and I think that's particularly important for those entry-level jobs. So I'm very grateful that I'm like 20 plus years into my career, because I think that you know, those jobs that are kind of like an apprentice model where you're you know, somebody more senior to you is giving you tasks to do and it's helping you learn the skills that you're going to need. I'm sure this is major in things like cinematography and you know, anything involving being on
Craft
film
involved
and
in
craft. It's any kind of craft, exactly. So as we can outsource more of those tasks to you know, a large language model, I worry not only will those jobs be the ones to disappear, but those are also the jobs where people really learn a craft of how to do something. And I know a lot of companies are struggling with how do, you know, okay, maybe GPT is better than our associate lawyer at, you know, sifting through millions of pages of case law and documents, but then where are our senior partners going to come from eventually?
I think those are great points. I wanted to just sort of mention that there's sort of two thoughts that came to my mind. One is sort of that skill level, that craftsmanship that we see eroding, and that many people complain about eroding over the past. Just you know, someone who's a good bricklayer or good skill at doing tile or anything that maybe have changed because of technology. And on the GPS thing, it seems that once we get comfortable enough with a certain technology, many times we're willing to cede control because we don't have to take that responsibility anymore. I didn't get lost. It was the GPS that misdirected me. So in certain scenarios, that's a sort of a low stakes one. We do want to cede control just so that we don't have to take responsibility once it's become a very established technology. All right, we're going to move on to Ryan. Thank you so much, Lauren. It was fascinating stuff. Ryan, so now you're a data scientist. Let's get into a little of the nitty gritty about AI and machine learning. So machine learning was a term that we've heard like for a while back to Deep Blue and like you know, learning how to beat a computer. How is it different than AI, or is it different? You have to unmute him.
Oh,
Sorry, one moment.
right. I don't know why.
There you go. Okay, there you are.
Yeah, because like a lot of the terminology is kind of been blended together. But yeah, like so artificial intelligence usually doesn't apply to how we know it like from the movies. That's really more like artificial general intelligence, when like an AI can like think for itself, make its own decisions, interact with things. Like that's really more general intelligence. What we have is really deep learning. Like when people say AI is really with respect to like neural networks and deep learning, which is still just statistical modeling for prediction, right? It's just with a very specific sort of set of algorithms that in order to do that, right? But if you're looking at like all sort of statistical models to make predictions, that's really machine learning. And AI or deep learning is really like a subset of that. But one thing that I think is like really important, I think, for filmmakers to understand this statistical modeling or deep learning is really that it's a form of compression, right? Basically, how compression works for when you have, let's say, a camera is shooting some very large format and then it's recorded in a compressed format. That compression is actually a machine learning algorithm, like to figure out, let's say you're going to reduce the size of the file by like a tenth, then that 10% is basically the rows of information and resolution that can rebuild the rest of the image. So you're going to compress it down to 1/10 of the size. And then when it's ready for display on a television or a computer screen, it's going to decompress that 10% back to 100%. It's not going to be the same quality because you've still thrown away 90%, but you've kept the 10 that is most descriptive of what happened in that image. Now, the difference between machine learning and deep learning is that for machine learning, like in that compression algorithm in the camera, it's a fixed algorithm, right? It's going to do the same thing. It's going to basically use the same methodology to find that 10%. And then basically it's going to use the same methodology to expand it back out to the original image. But for deep learning, it's going to figure out its own compression algorithm, and it's going to figure out its own decompression algorithm, right? And so like that's like the big difference, and why it's kind of, you know, advanced from the traditional machine learning algorithms, is because it's been surprising us day in, day out, like how much it's able to learn when you give it the ability for it to teach itself, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I'm going to come back to you later afterwards, so I can understand a little bit how we can talk about lossless compression then. What does that really mean? How do we have lossless compression? In any case, so the next question has to do with what we're currently doing and what we may be doing in the future. What are things that you think that machine learning can allow filmmakers to do that we can't currently do now? And why is that important? Why do we need those things?
Got you. I mean, yeah, like I wouldn't say that like machine learning would necessarily do something that like a human can't do, but again, it's just about taking like the process that a human would do that, let's say, might take hours, and then reduce it to taking minutes. I think it's really just like going to increase sort of efficiency, because at the end of the day, you know, like what these models are doing is compressing information usually down to like a single coordinate point, right? Like, and that point holds all of the information of what was in an image or what was in a text, right? And so like it's still coming from human-made examples, so I don't think that it's going to do something that like a human can't do. But like for instance, like our application, like what we're working on at Filmatic, like takes the process of matching cameras, which can be a pretty tedious task because there's a lot of physics with, you know, the light that's in the scene versus the filters in the camera versus the colors of the objects in the scene, right? There's a lot of like moving parts as far as like spectrums are concerned. So sometimes in color correction, it becomes difficult to match cameras under different conditions. And so since at the end of the day, this problem with respect to light and spectrums is really a geometric problem. That's where machine learning and deep learning is really, really like good at. So for the problem of matching cameras, that might take, you know, like more consistent work of matching multiple times under multiple contexts. But like when you give it to a machine learning algorithm, they can kind of solve that problem a lot faster. So yeah, I think like in those sort of ways, there's definitely opportunities for filmmakers to engage with data scientists, like kind of how like Leland has, and fix like efficiency problems that we have in the workflows that we currently are working on right now.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think that you know, filmmaking is a process or media is a process that we've created over the last 100 years, and we kind of like how it works. Like it's a process that works, and so we're reticent to change it, but we don't mind doing it faster, quicker, cheaper, better, like any process that evolves. Okay, so last question for Ryan. What else can we expect to use machine learning or AI going forward in the filmmaking process? You've talked about, you know, what you're doing is post-production. What do you see in other parts of the process? Because process is really, at this point, the stage where AI can help us, and it is useful.
Yeah. Yeah, I would say like that there's a whole host of different places in sort of like workflows with respect to different departments. It's really about repeated processes, right? Like how often are you doing that process kind of over and over and over and over again, right? And then the other question is how easy can you aggregate data together, right? So like just like what I was saying before, the way that all of these algorithms work, like whether it's images, text, music, or whatever, like it's going to design a way to compress that information into like a single coordinate point. And then from that single coordinate point that might be in this like super high dimensional space, it's going to build it back out to an image or text or, you know, like a video. And you can kind of go from video to music. You can go from music to video, like, and we've obviously seen text to video, like all of these different modalities. You can make models to go from one mode to another mode. And so it's really like where you can filmmakers aggregate their own data. That's kind of where we're focused on at Filmatic. Like, we have a web application where you can take your own camera tests that you shoot like for a production, and then use that to match cameras, and you have your own machine learning model that's yours that is used for the context of whatever matches are needed, like whether it's a crash cam that needs to match to, like your A cam, that sort of thing. But I think that there's a lot of opportunities, like even within like camera department, but it's really about access, like what access do you have to data that's with regard to the problem that you're trying to solve. So like that, and then the collaboration with data scientists, I think is like really, really crucial. Being on the ASC committee, I've kind of seen some of the cases where AI has made it onto larger sets. And I think it's likely that there's going to be another department similar to VTR, where like a signal is going to, a large computer that's going to be running like machine learning models in real time, like basically for whatever the production would like, how they would like to enhance the image with like AI in real time, so that then you can catch when there are some artifacts or something's not working, and then coordinate with what might end up being a new department of data scientists to kind of rectify that during the production before it gets to post. So like, I think, yeah, there's like we've kind of discussed, I think like, certain tasks might become much more efficient, which might reduce the amount of people that are needed, but then new departments are going to pop up, I think, on a film set, especially for, at least for larger budget projects, to manage how these tools get integrated on set.
I think there's a great analogy there too with the laboratory. When I started, we were almost exclusively shooting film. We had to rely on a lab to tell us how it was going to look when it was printed. Now we've got a DIT and we don't have a lab with digital, although that process still exists. We may wind up with that's kind of a new department, so to speak. It's part of the camera department, but it is a computer technologist who is running part of our camera department. So now, especially with LED volume stages, you see technicians who are not traditionally part of the filmmaking process getting integrated. It sounds like going forward, you may have an AI scientist coming in and saying, hey, you know what, we can fix that highlight right there, put something else there, and that will track and be realistic and so forth, as long as you give us enough data. That's the other thing, is the data scientists, and the compression idea is very interesting too. If we think of all the data compressed and then re-expanded as we need it, that's sort of an interesting way to think of AI in general. Thank you. That was great, Ryan. We're going to have time now. It seems we managed to take some questions from, first, we're going to start with questions that have been asked previously. I'm going to open up all of the mics to Stephen, Lauren, and Ryan, and I'm just going to let whoever feels like jumping in, jump in. So there are two questions that are kind of,
Yeah, I don't know how to turn on the cameras for everyone.
Oh, okay. So here, I'm gonna reclaim the host. Hold on. I think I can do that and start video. Enable. You can, I think, yeah, okay, here we go. So now we can start seeing all of your real faces instead of your avatars. So you can start your video now, everybody, if you want to be seen. So one question is, we've been talking about media traditionally like storytelling, but what about documentary and unscripted television? What can we expect going forward in that? You'll have to also unmute Stephen. Oh, I can do it now. Sorry. What do you think is gonna what is, we think of documentary as like capturing the real stuff. So how do we imagine AI fitting in there?
Well, I'll just take a quick stab at that, and that is, I predict, whether in documentaries, but across the board, we're going to see a lot more animation, easy to do, becoming easier and easier to do with great efficiency and visual effects. So you will see more animation in the recreation of scenes, and I think that adds for some interesting storytelling as well. Another area that we're going to see is just, whether it's documentary or scripted narratives, just this ability to ferret out subtitles and to have, if desired, have your characters speak the local language and have the lips manipulated, because there are now software programs that do this seamlessly. So they will speak the local language using the voice of the subject. Hopefully the contracts will be refined so that the subject release will permit that. And then finally, the issue of music is always vexed producers, and in certain territories, you could be blocked from using a composition, but there are programs now that can take that song and make a completely new song, start to finish, master as well as underlying composition, and create a song that does not have any restraints. So, those are just a few of the things that you'll see.
Right. Does anyone else want to weigh in on that, or should we move to the next? We'll move to the next question then.
We have like 5, 6 questions.
We have 5 or
We
6
don't
questions.
agree, so.
They're all good. So, okay. So I'm reading this for the first time, so forgive me. For the case where the algorithm is deciding both how it will get from point A to point B, then deciding perhaps the route to get back from point B to point A, how traceable is that for humans? And I think this is really about that idea of like taking a lot of data, compressing it, then expanding it. Can we track that? And what audit trails are available at the moment, or can we foresee in the future to the provenance, I believe, is what we're talking about, of the material we're looking at. It's one thing to say, oh, this was created by AI. It's another thing to say, this was created by AI, trace it back to the original material that it was created from. Ryan, maybe
So
you, yeah.
that's like, it's pretty difficult. That's why they kind of call it a black box, as far as for deep learning, because like we've been talking about how it's going to be compressed, right? So we have an image, let's say it's an HD image, it's 1920 by 1080, 3 channels, red, green, and blue, right? So that's going to get compressed in most of these like algorithms down to a single pixel that might have 10,000 channels, right? And what are those 10,000 channels measuring? We don't know. Like the algorithm has decided it, right? So like if it's an image like about like like let's say it's from a Wes Anderson movie, right? You might see that some of those pixels locations, like if you're in the trace, might be in the center of the image, and you might think that maybe some of those channels are measuring the composition, right? But no one really knows for sure. You can kind of see small correlations, but out of the 10,000 slots where it can measure like ways in which it's analyzing the image, we don't really have a way to trace specifically like, okay, slot 1 means this, slot 10,000 means that. It's really it's a little difficult. But what you can do is basically in the training set, especially for the text to image, text to video, like see the original prompt that was used for that image, and then basically whether or not like that image is produced pretty like accurately, is really the only way to trace. But you can't really like look inside the algorithm and figure it out.
Okay, but now just following up on that, is there a possibility, because we know that AI is very good at pattern recognition and image recognition. Can we take the final image and send it back into an AI and say, where's the source material from this final image coming from based on the data set it has?
I mean, like, yeah. I mean, you can basically train, if you could train the model going one way, you can train the model going another way, right? But it's, you kind of still need the original training data set, like to basically like swap directions. So yeah, you could 100%, and some of the models are good at this. Like, I mean, you can like submit an image or like video content and be like, what would the descriptors be for what would be the text prompt that would produce this sort of output? Like that does exist, but it's still kind of like an approximation, as opposed to like leading to a direct result.
Fantastic. All right, this one is probably for Stephen. In terms of legality in the US, are we dependent on what Biden's task force on AI is going to come up with? Or are there other regulations that we can ask our representatives for, that we can lobby for on a local level or through our trade unions to protect us against job loss from AI? What can we do as, people? Oh, I'm sorry. 1 second. I have to unmute you. There you go. One moment. I don't know why it's not letting me ask to unmute. There we go. Oh, I had you for a second, then I lost you. I think, there we go. Okay, sorry about that.
Well, I mean, you can look to the AI Act that the EU recently passed and will go into effect in 2025 as a reference point where they have enforcement at the individual state level. I think legislation is entirely possible on a local, state, and federal level because of the copyright issues, which is a federal issue. It's likely that will take precedent, and so I think there will be regulation. The Biden administration has made it a priority. There's some pushback from business, but there's also some partnering with business, understanding what could happen if left unchecked and deep fakes become just the norm, and information becomes harmful. And that's really what is that's the basis of the AI Act to begin with. It's the transparency and the affirmative obligation to disclose when you are using generative artificial intelligence materials. If you're looking at content that's using AI, I suspect that there will be an affirmative obligation down the road, just like in the EU. Well, you will have to disclose that.
Right. Fantastic. Maybe there's a way Lauren can sort of weigh in on this. Do you see anything currently, Lauren, that's groups of people that are forming together? Like, is this happening already where people are saying like, hey, we want this legislation, or is it too soon?
No, I definitely am seeing some of that. Interestingly, I mean, I don't typically write much about the film industry, but I was recently speaking to some people who are from the concept art world, storyboard artists, concept artists. And I know that they have, there's a group called the Concept Art Association that did some fundraising and hired a lobbyist in Washington. They were also telling me about, there's a professor of computer science at the University of Chicago that created a program called Nightshade, which you can embed into your images. And if those images are then scraped by a large language model, it has like a poison pill in it that will poison the image and make it so that it can't be taken. As some of you may already know about this and be using it. So I think it's, and I think it's really interesting with any kind of technology, there's going to be a process of resistance, adaptation, panic, fear, opportunity, all these things. So that process of implementing technologies is a very human one. So similar to what Stephen was saying about all these efforts to legislate. So I do see, I thought that was a really interesting example of a kind of a grassroots guerrilla response to this. But I do, and maybe this is a question for Stephen, I am curious, first of all, if the laws that are being considered relate to production or distribution. And if it's production, it's like, okay, so anything produced, in the United States is subject to these. Doesn't that just push a lot of the production to places that are where there's not so much regulation?
I think that's a very good observation. But as we said earlier, the IA Act in EU, which is setting the pace on regulation, requires those disclosures if the materials are if the content is going to be disseminated within the EU, and that's a pretty that's pretty much the case, the probability for most content. So that is, and then if you're using a large language model materials from the US, that's going there. So I do think that we are trending towards disclosure. I'm curious to see how the copyright protection question is answered, because as the New York Times is challenging, and you've got Sarah Silverman, you've got all these content creators, all these owners of copyrights that are having their materials scraped. The Authors Guild is another example of that, and I'm really interested to see how those disputes get resolved. The initial argument by the platforms is that is fair use, and I don't think that's going to really hold much water, especially in light of the Warhol Foundation Goldsmith decision by the Supreme Court. In that case, they leaned heavily into the commercial use, and all of these platforms, they may be trying to create something that has some education. You're educating a content base or a model, but you are very much doing it with an eye towards the marketplace, and wind up competing against in some way. And it's a circumvention to those property owners. And ultimately, I believe that they will have to go to the copyright owners and license those materials, or wait them out, because every copyright has a term. And as we've seen recently, and with some of the iconic Disney characters, the copyright term expires, and those materials will eventually go into the public domain.
Well, we're getting very short on time here, but I want to get one more question here. It's probably a good one to end on. So there is obviously a lot of stigma about AI in the film industry. A lot of South by Southwest groups booing anything that was AI at a festival recently, for example, and a lot of reaction to that Sora video that came out. What can we do to promote, as filmmakers, as creatives, a healthy dialogue about this, which we obviously can't ignore it? What else, other than things like this, what else can we do amongst ourselves and amongst our colleagues to try to get a dialogue going that is productive, that isn't just about fear and anxiety?
I would say, like, one thing for sure, to be careful of kind of using archetypes from movies in ways to talk about how it's affecting us in real life. Like, basically, AI, again, is just really statistics. It's really just statistical modeling. And so I think it's important for filmmakers to gain at least exposure, right? Because, like, I think the best way to kind of see what it can do and what it can't do, and what it's really, really struggling with, is like to kind of use some of these tools, whether it's Midjourney or Dolly 3, right? And then a lot of fears, I think, will be quelled once you see like the ceiling of what can actually be done when you have a creative vision in your head and you're trying to have the model actually produce it. Like, it, especially if you're that kind of creative, you're going to find that, like, there's limitations with generative AI for making films that sort of way. So I think, like, once you gain exposure, then things become a lot less fearful. So, like, and most of these tools are free. So like I think that is healthy to begin dialogue. And then it gives you kind of exposure to what other things might be able to be produced when working, let's say, with a data scientist to solve some problems that, like, these larger language models actually can't solve that well. That's at least what we're trying to focus on. But yeah, I think, like, exposure is definitely key, and will make things a lot more clear.
Yeah, I think it's also interesting. I've been participating in a lot of dialogues myself online and with colleagues, and most people who hear that, oh, this AI is terrible and it's going to take everything. There, a lot of people are saying, well, we're the ones who have to decide. We have to take some agency in this and decide we like doing it this way. This works for us. This is intrusive. This doesn't work. This isn't good enough, and not let just the sort of corporate structure decide that for us. We're gonna go a little bit over here if it's all right with everybody, and if you have to leave, we'll understand. I'm going to ask Rob Levy here, one of our participants, to unmute so he can directly ask his question.
And then there are questions
Yes.
about resources, which
Okay,
can
well, I'm
gain
sorry.
traction.
There's questions about resources.
Yes, what resources people can use. So maybe
Okay.
we can get back to everybody, but like currently we can answer that after. But like,
Right, well,
one thing at a
we're gonna,
time.
yeah, okay, so Rob, go ahead and ask your question. I think it was mostly
I think it was pretty much answered by Steven. Sorry, I look like I'm in witness protection here.
But go
You
ahead.
know, based on these legal rulings that AI generated materials are not copyrightable at this moment, do we actually, when we allow AI to ingest our materials and to help us create new materials, have we sort of signed away something to the AI platforms where they could challenge any copyright we might want to have and say, well, this was generated on our platform, whether it's music, image, intellectual property, and basically that they would be a joint copyright holder?
Oh, they wouldn't be a
That's-
joint copyright holder if you're using generative AI and you're contributing your own original creative work. You can register that, and that would be entirely your copyright. You can't copyright the machine learning, but you can certainly, I mean, the AI element, but you can copyright your contributions to that, which is effectively owning and controlling. I want to just go back for a second, so I know a number of people here are involved in the film community, and I appreciated the question regarding South by Southwest and the jeering at the screen, and I feel like that's it's really
You were just there, Stephen, right?
I was there, and it's really there. That's a matter of a subject of fear, and I really think that's unwanted. We've seen other platforms in the past where people have had tremendous fear and the sky is falling. Let me tell you from where I stand, and I represent creators, I represent producers, I represent financiers. I think the entire ecosystem of film is really under stress, and I don't know why people are thinking or singing happy days, because films are having a real tough time getting meaningful distribution. Even at the studio level, the cost to make content has been too great, and AI offers an opportunity to compress budgets, an opportunity for independent filmmakers and producers like the ones who I saw at South by Southwest to make more challenging, more thoughtful content, because the risk will be greater, the budgets will be smaller. So I'm excited about the kind of storytelling that is around the corner as these technologies, as text to video and all these other great software programs come in. There will be a reduced cost to making independent films, and I think that's a way to potentially reinvigorate the independent film sector, but also give studios a shot at staying in the game. The animation in particular, the cost for animation will go much less than the typical $200 million of film. The cost to market will still be great, but the cost to production at the studio level, and ultimately get used to the fact that you will see synthetics, actors. The cost of labor is very significant, and there will be producers that will gain a much better digital dexterity with synthetic talent. And you'll be seeing a lot of that too. I'm not making judgments, but I do want to observe that this is a really challenging time in the film business, and I think the technology offers an opportunity to bring it to a scale where real quality storytelling can happen.
Interesting, yeah. I just want to mention that Megan and Daniela, Megan Mazur and Daniela have asked us to find out where people can learn more about AI and how to use it, especially for cinematographers. I don't know if any of us have the answer to that. Ryan may a little bit, but I also want to mention that people have asked us to start a Signal or Discord group so that we can
Maybe
keep this
Facebook,
discussion,
yeah.
or we can do it on Facebook as well. But we're going to look into how we can keep this conversation going and an open platform so people can really dig in. And you know, just like we have a great resource on Facebook, Cinematography Salon, people ask questions about cameras, film stock, lenses. We could have people asking questions about, oh, this AI model or that one. It may be a little bit more complicated, but I think it'd be an interesting thing to look into. Does Ryan, maybe you have a place where a forum, or I know I've been looking at which at Reddit, actually, the Singularity forum, but that's a little bit more
Techie. I think
techie.
that's techie. I think we should start really gathering resources.
Yeah, maybe we can start
um,
putting together a resource book for people.
And just keep it like all open for everyone,
Yeah.
so everyone can contribute.
Also, I want to point out that our panelists have shared their contact or LinkedIn or information on our page. So I'm certain, I don't want to speak for them, but I'm certain they wouldn't mind hearing from you directly to answer questions. I don't know if they'll have time to get back to you immediately, but we'll also be happy to answer questions or relay questions.
The chat will be available, so if
Oh, yeah,
people want
the
to
chat
drop
will
off
be-
questions,
right.
we'll just figure out some way to continue the conversation and make it the beginning, not the end.
All right.
There's lots of need.
There's lots of need, yes. All right, well, listen, thank you all very much. This was, I think, very productive and informative, and I'm sorry we don't have more time, but we'll very likely do another one of these, you know, sooner rather than later, because we have to keep ahead of this technology ourselves. All right, enjoy your day, everybody, and thanks for dropping by.